So welcome everybody. This is our webinar called Finish Strong, where we're going to be sharing the blueprint that agencies are using to land 6- and 7-figure wins before year's end. So as we get started here, Janet, if you could load up the first
Yep.
poll, but I'd love to hear, and we do this on all of our webinars lately, is how difficult has new business been for your firm compared to the prior 12 months? And I'd like to ask this and just sort of get a pulse for how things are feeling. The last one we did was back in May, so it's been a couple months here. So we'll see the results as they roll in. But I do speak with dozens of agencies on a monthly basis, and overall, I'm hearing that 2025 isn't going as planned for many of us. And if it gives you any sort of solace, you're not alone. And I think some of the numbers that we'll show here in the poll will show that. But that being said, you don't need to panic. You just likely need a better system. And I think today we're going to share what we're seeing agencies doing, either the agencies that are clients of ours, agencies that we're just speaking to, and share some secrets I think that they're using that you can hopefully use in your firm as well. So I don't know, Janet, has the poll kind of leveled off or?
Yeah, yep. I would say we're about 80% now for those that were in the two top boxes, between significantly harder at 26% and somewhat harder at 54%.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So as I mentioned, in May, we did very similar in our past webinar, and 76% of agencies said that it was either harder or significantly harder. And we did one in the beginning of the year, and I want to say that was like 70%. So unfortunately, we've seen it get a little bit more challenging over the course of this year here. But again, we hope that some of the strategies and ideas that we have here will hopefully turn that around. And part of that, the other stat you'll see here is 65% of agencies are experiencing longer sales cycles. So that is contributing. It's hard enough to get the leads, but then when you get the leads, they're not converting, as fast as they had in the past. And another stat that I think we'll also see that hopefully, again, this presentation here will help with is that 48% is the average satisfaction rate of business development programs. So, more than half are not satisfied with their overall program. So again, hopefully today we'll give you some new ideas. So before we get into the content, I know we mentioned that there's a number of first timers here. So a little bit about us. We are a growth consulting firm that specializes in helping agencies and consulting firms land 6- and 7-figure opportunities predictably. They're coming to us when they have problems such as low brand awareness, insufficient leads, maybe deals stalled in the pipeline, or retention and growth challenges. And we've worked with everything from the large agency holding companies down to small boutiques that might be only a handful of people. But really, our responsibility and job is to help them land opportunities at these larger enterprise organizations. And we do that through everything from thought leadership content, such as like our Next Big Win newsletter and webinars like this, to group coaching programs, which we'll talk a little bit about later today, and also more one-to-one consulting and even kind of outsourced, agency type services for agencies and consulting firms. A little bit about me. I started a concert promotion business out of high school. I would go on to work with artists like Lady Gaga and Pitbull, and along the way got introduced to experiential marketing and started doing activations for companies like Allstate and Toyota and Disney. And the business essentially then became part experiential activations for clients, as well as our own concerts and events. Did that for about 15 years, sold that business, and then decided I want to go all in on the agency space, specifically in business development, and have done probably about 12 years now in business development type roles. I've worked for agencies in biz dev roles, and then also about 4 or 5 years ago, created this company, which is here to help firms like yours, hopefully, land bigger and better deals. So a little bit about us, and I'll want to do a little bit of a thought experiment here. So I'd love everybody that's on the call here to close your eyes for a second, take a deep breath, and just sort of imagine that it's New Year's Eve, December 31st, and you've just wrapped up your biggest quarter of the year. You've turned things around, you have active conversations with your dream clients, and you feel Great, because you have a repeatable system that is going to drive growth into 2026. So you can open your eyes and, hopefully you can kind of see yourself there. And I'm hoping, again, that some of these ideas that we're going to share will help you get to that goal because it is achievable and there are firms that are doing quite well still. So what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of like the old rules and the new rules, as I like to call them, because the market is changing. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for 20 years in some capacity, and more recently, this company the last 5 years. And what worked when we first started, what's worked even last year, doesn't necessarily work now. It doesn't mean these things don't work at all. It means they've evolved, and I want to share some of those with you here today. So from a strategic positioning and market focus perspective, the old way really is, hey, let's hope referrals and good work are enough to build our reputation and win us business. But that's not working. The new way is really about proactively building relationships with your high value prospects before they're even in market. The old way is really running disconnected campaigns for your own sales and marketing efforts, where sales is kind of doing one thing, marketing is doing another, and there's no real connection to sales goals. But the new way is really aligning your sales, marketing, and even your client services under one go-to-market strategy. Now I want to talk a little bit about team structure and operational efficiency. So the old way might be the over-reliance on a founder or maybe a single BD person to handle all the outreach and other business development tasks manually. Versus the new way is really, again, building a go-to-market operation, but combining offshore talent, automation, AI to really support your team and increase output. Another old way might be to hire this rainmaker, right? Somebody who comes in, he's got this big personal network, all these, past clients they've worked with and relationships, but they lack a structured process. And the new way is really building, again, a system with repeatable, measurable processes that don't necessarily depend on any one individual. I want to talk a little bit about marketing and sales execution. So the old way might be measuring the success of your marketing by the podcast downloads, the webinar attendees, your social impressions that you've had for your own efforts, where you're really, again, focused more on mass reach over strategic relationships. Versus the new way is really reverse engineering relationships with your dream clients and inviting them to be guests, collaborators, contributors to your marketing and creating value and starting conversations with them versus trying to just get reach. Another way, the old way would be, hey, let's download a list. We're going to send out a bunch of emails to a wide unfiltered audience. Versus the new way is using buying signals and intent data to target the right people at the right time. Talk a little bit about content strategy and channel selection. Old way might be talking about your company, your people, the awards, a lot of self-promotional type content. Versus the new way is to think and act like a media company, educating your audience and helping them solve real problems. Old way might be to rely on inbound content, blogs, SEO, organic social posts. But with AI now, it's really difficult. And hoping your ideal audience then stumbles across it isn't a great strategy. Versus the new way is to define a really narrow target audience using paid thought leadership, personal brand voices, and ABM campaigns to reach them directly. And then the last one I want to go over is measurement, mindset, and revenue alignment. So the old way really is investing just in these kind of short-term performance marketing for lead generation type programs versus the new way is building brand awareness while also driving performance through sustainable growth. And lastly is only measuring, the old way is only measuring success based on meetings booked and revenue won versus the new way is tracking reach, engagement, and account penetration as predictors of future growth. And these leading indicators would then, move and show you're on the right direction to those meetings booked and revenue won later. So as you think about those various old ways and new ways, Janet, if you can tee up the next poll here. I'd love to kind of hear, like, where do you see yourself in this? Are you, is your program looking at mostly these old ways? Is it a little bit of old? Is it some new? Is it all new? But kind of curious, where you fall into that kind of spectrum, if you will. So we'll give that a few minutes to go, and I want to get into the real meat of this presentation, what you guys are here for. So I'm going to be sharing 5 different secrets, if you will, that agencies that we work with and consulting firms that we advise are doing differently than others, and where you can take some inspiration from. So the first one is that referrals are not a growth strategy, but relationship making is, and why waiting for the phone to ring keeps you stuck in that feast or famine cycle. So the old belief is really, hey, if we do great work, referrals are, going to fuel our growth. And make no mistake, like I'm all for referrals, and they can be a great source for you, but relying on them as your primary source of business development is not a great idea. And why is it not? Because it leads to an unpredictable pipeline. You don't know when a referral is going to come in. You don't know who it's going to come in from, what it's going to come in for. So it's really hard to grow strategically if you're just relying on those types of referrals. And that leads to that feast or famine revenue swings that, I know many of the firms that we talk to experience. And because of that, you really are invisible to your dream clients, because if your network isn't filled with your dream clients, and that's the only way they're hearing about you is through word of mouth, nobody knows. You become that best kept secret that we shared earlier, which is the old way of really going about business development. So an interesting stat here is some research shows that 71% of agencies rely on referrals to generate leads, and it's the #1 channel that they're utilizing. So in our experience, again, that is what we're trying to get away from. Word of mouth is great. Think of it as a bonus, though. It shouldn't be what you're relying your entire growth around. And that's where this notion of relationship making, which we've mentioned a couple times, already here. And this is something that we've coined, and we've really built all of our advisory practice around. It's how do we identify, build, and nurture meaningful connections with ideal prospects that lead to long-term and mutually beneficial business relationships. So that's the mentality that we want everybody taking, is how are we proactively building these relationships with new prospects versus just relying on our existing relationships that we have. So there's really 3 keys to relationship making, which is identify, build, and nurture. So on the identification piece of this, it's really understanding who is the ideal company that you should be working with. What are their industries? What are their company sizes? What are their locations? And then also understanding who within those companies, the buyer personas, should you be talking to? What is their job title? What is their position in the company, their rank in the organization? And then ultimately leading to a named target account list. So a list of companies that you believe you want, that you could do great work for and fit, and vice versa. But these are the companies that you're going to actively be trying to get and build a relationship with. It's hard to build a relationship with somebody if you don't know who you're trying to build a relationship with in the first place. So that identify piece is critical. But then once you've identified it, you actually have to now build that relationship. And we believe that the best way to do that is through thought leadership content. But not just any thought leadership that shares a unique perspective on how to solve those target accounts that you're trying to build a relationship with, how to solve their critical problems. And then using awareness and demand generation campaigns to get that thought leadership content in front of them. So you're not just hoping that they stumble upon it, you're being proactive with it. But we know that not all of your market, actually more than probably 95% of your market, is not in market for your services at any one given time. Therefore, it's not enough just to create the thought leadership. You have to actually actively be nurturing that relationship. You need to maintain visibility and trust with these prospects consistently, and drive value with them consistently. So you remain top of mind. So when they are ready to invest in a solution like yours, you are top of mind. You are on their short list. So it's these 3 key areas to how to actively make and build your relationships with your ideal clients. So I'm going to share with each one of these different secrets an action step that I want you to think about. So I think everybody's gonna get a copy of this presentation. It probably is gonna go out tomorrow. But I encourage you to reflect on these different action steps for each one of these different secrets. And that's, I think, really where you're gonna start to see some areas and gaps in how you can find improvement within your own programs. So specific to this one about referrals, what I would encourage you to do is, go to your CRM or somehow find all the new business opportunities you had over the past 12 months and which ones came from word of mouth and referrals, which one came from more proactive outreach or intentional relationship building. And if that number is skewing more towards referrals and word of mouth, that might be an indicator that you have a little bit of an issue when it comes to your proactive program. And the goal then should be, how do we increase that number to be getting more proactive outreach or intentional relationship building type of leads? So that leads us to the next secret. But before I get there, yeah, Jan, I'd love to hear about old ways, new ways.
Yep, yep. Okay, so looking at, we had about 66% of you voted, so I don't know what your other part are doing, but it looks like 14% of you do feel like you're kind of stuck in the old ways. And 58% of you feel like there's a bit of this balance, which is pretty much kind of what we would expect. You've got some old, you've got some new. So together, that would be about 72% that maybe you feel like there's a little bit of a struggle. And then 25%, you feel like you're mostly in the new ways, and 3% of you, God love you, you're all in on the new playbook. So I'm hoping you're going to see some ideas today that says, I need bigger playbooks even.
Excellent. Great. Yeah. So that's 72%, though. That's quite a bit that I think hopefully we'll come away with some new inspiration here.
Mhm.
Um, all right. So getting into secret number 2 is you don't need a rainmaker. You need a repeatable system. Why hiring someone with a magic Rolodex isn't a growth plan. So the old belief is, hey, we're just going to hire the right salesperson or BD leader and growth's going to take care of itself, right? I think I hear this story all the time. We're going to hire somebody, and unfortunately, what ends up happening is usually that doesn't translate in any business. Whether that because the contacts to that person, they've kind of grown old or stale, or maybe they have those contacts, but the type of services your firm offers isn't a match for that company or what they need at that one given time. So there's a lot of timing issues that are involved in it all. That said, sometimes it does work where they do bring in one or two, new clients, which is great. But what happens when they leave? They're leaving you with nothing. You are starting from scratch again. And ultimately the knowledge is staying, in their head. So then you're out there trying to hire somebody new, and it also ultimately then falls back on the founder, the owner, the CEO to be the main growth driver, once again. And I can say I've been in that role before where I've been a business development person that comes in, and it's hard because if there is no system in place, you're spending the first maybe 6 months or more trying to build the system. And then ultimately there's pressure coming from leadership to get results, but it's hard to get results when you've just been trying to put the right foundations in place. But imagine a scenario where you have the system and you're just plugging someone into something that has already worked, and just utilizing, them to kind of activate it. So with that said, 64% of agencies, according to this RSW poll, reported that their last new business hire was unsuccessful. So that's quite a bit. And that number actually has gone up from 2023, which was 56%. Also, from the same research report, 76% of agency biz dev directors have a tenure of less than 2 years. So you can see most people, they're not seeing great success with their biz dev people. They're not lasting very long. And it's this, again, this sort of, cycle and roller coaster. And again, it's because there's not a system in place. You're just really hiring this one person for, their Rolodex, if you will. And that's where, again, having a system and a process comes into play. And this here, is the way relationship making, when you're working with us and what we teach, how it comes to life is through this framework that we call focus. And I'll go over it, here today. But focus really all starts with finding and prioritizing accounts. So like what we talked about earlier, who's the right ICP, the right buyer persona, and having a named target account list, and then prioritizing them, tiering them according to, the value that they might bring or the fit that they might be for your particular company. So you need that named target account list. The second part of this is orchestrate thought leadership. So it's now, how are you going to create content that's going to differentiate you in the market, position you as an authority, and build your brand amongst that target audience that you're trying to get in front of? The C then is create awareness and demand. As we talked about, you can't just create the thought leadership. You need proactively to get it in front of them. You need email newsletters, LinkedIn advertising, content syndication, events. There's any number of different channels that you could utilize to get that thought leadership in front of that ideal audience. And the reason why you're trying to do that is you're trying to, again, build that awareness and demand, but also leading to signals, which gets us to the U. And what I mean by signals are, we think about signals in two different camps. One would be engagement activities, meaning these are companies that might have visited your website or engaged with you on social or clicked on an email newsletter. So they're engaging with you in some way, shape, or form. The other type of signal could be what we call event triggers. So maybe they have a new chief marketing officer, or they just raised some funding, or they went through a merger and acquisition, some sort of event that would indicate that they are more likely to be in market for services like yours at any given time. So you're using your thought leadership and your demand gen to try to create these various signals. And then that's what leads us to S, which is the strike with precision. So this is now where you're going to look at those signals and prioritize those that are the strongest signals and reach out directly to those prospects. And this is where it's very different than your kind of traditional old school way of doing outreach, where you're just downloading a list and blasting off emails. Here, you're looking at people that they already know you, and hopefully they like and trust you as well. And then they're also demonstrating some level of intent. So you can be much more hyper-focused in who you're reaching out to and what you're connecting with them about. And we find that this type of an approach, gives you dramatically better response rates and results than, again, your kind of old school way of reaching out. And if you've done, a good job with the awareness and demand piece, you're going to be getting inbound opportunities that come off of this. So you don't necessarily even have to get to the point of the signals or the reaching out with through cold emails and emails and whatnot. So that's the process, the focus model that we take all our clients through, and this can be done at a high level, and it also can be done at a campaign level, depending on certain audiences that you're trying to reach. So with that said, again, each one of these secrets is going to have an action step. So this particular one, again, you're going to get a copy of this, and I don't feel like you got to, write all this down. But I'd like you to take a look at the various steps of the focus framework. So, for example, find and prioritize accounts, and I want you to rate your maturity level on this. So, low maturity might be, hey, we don't have a clearly defined target audience or even a named target account list. That would be low. Versus high might be, hey, we have a well-documented ICP, buyer personas, we have our name target account list, and we're regularly updating it. So I'd like you, again, when you get a copy of this, circle each one of these different boxes for this, and this will help you identify where there might be some gaps. And I would then focus first and foremost on those low maturity areas and focus your effort on improving that as much as you can. So that's the second secret. Third secret now is that in B2B, brand is just as important as performance. Why short-term clicks and meetings aren't enough to win big. So again, the old belief in this area is that performance marketing is all we need, right? Just lead gen. Let's just send out some emails and we'll get meetings and we'll win business. And this brand building it's just fluff, which is funny to hear agencies, say this, because I don't think you would tell in most cases your clients that. But that being said, the problem with this is that you're only reaching in-market buyers. And again, the research shows that 95% of the market isn't in market right now for products and services like yours. So you're fighting just to get that 5% that might be in market. But the challenge there is that you're invisible to everybody else, before that decision process is being made, because oftentimes when they've made the decision to buy, they've already made a a list of vendors that they want to work with, and you might be late to the party at that point. So if you're trying to insert yourself after they've already made a short list of potential agencies, then that means your only differentiator really is price, because you haven't been able to build that brand equity with that particular prospect in advance. And some data points again that back this up is 70% of B2B buyers complete their purchasing process before ever engaging with a seller. So this is different. 20 years ago, they had to talk to BD people. They had to speak to sellers. Now, because of the internet, it's so accessible for clients to go to Google, go to websites, go to review sites, turn to AI now and ask questions. So they're doing all of this research before they ever engage with a seller. With that being said, 80% of the time, the buyer is actually the one that's going to initiate the outreach. So if you're just trying to push things at them, that's not going to work that well, because 80% of the time, they're the ones that are actually going to reach out to you. Another 80% of the time, buyers already have a preferred vendor at the time of first contact. And that goes back to what I was saying before, is that when they're doing their research, they are building their own short list of prospects. And that's long before you send out a cold email or any of these other things. So this is where the brand building has to come in, because you want to get on that short list and be in that consideration set while they're evaluating and considering this before they're even ready to buy. Otherwise, again, you're just fighting for that 5% of the pie, and it's oftentimes too late. So this is where now the idea of this brand and performance flywheel that we talk about comes into play. So on the brand marketing side, it's about creating broad awareness and positive associations with your company. That's what you're trying to get across with your marketing. You want to work at an emotional level to build trust and preference over time. You want to reach a wider audience, right? Not just that 5% that's in market right now. And this will help reduce price sensitivity and improve margins. So what you'll be doing here is it's thought leadership content, it's brand level advertising, it's sponsorships, maybe at events that your target audience are attending or associations that they're a part of. It's PR, it's having a value first newsletter. It's all of these things that, again, are here to build awareness and demand for your services before they're in market. But then the activation piece comes in, which is, again, more the performance side. So this is where you're trying to trigger an immediate response from those prospects who are likely to buy soon. These are your hot prospects that are showing some level of interest or signals that we talked about. And this is where, again, you're trying to deliver more measurable ROI here in the short term. So activation examples would be outbound sales, outreach, retargeting ads, gated content, event follow-up sequences, product demos. And I know in speaking with, again, dozens of agencies every month, everybody wants to skip the brand part and go right into the activation piece. And I get it. I'm an agency owner essentially myself as well. I understand the short-term pressures, but you have to have a balance of both of these. You can't just focus on one or the other. You could get away with more of the activation piece years ago and skip some of the brand, but we're not seeing that now. You have to have both. And research supports this as well. LinkedIn commissioned a study about the B2B growth, and Les Binet and Peter Field, who have done a lot of research. I'm sure those names are known by many of you here. Found from a B2B perspective that 46% of your overall marketing budget should be spent on brand. This is for B2B. This is not B2C. B2C is different. And then 54% should be spent on performance. So your lead capture and conversion. And so it's still a big piece of the activation, but we're seeing, unfortunately, completely almost skipping the whole brand element for most agencies and consulting firms. So as a next step, what I encourage you to do here is take a look at your revenue last year. What was that number? And then how much did you spend on sales and marketing? And the caveat here is this includes salary. So your BD person, include them in that number. If the agency founder spends 50% of their time on business development, include 50% of their salary in the number. But add all that up together and then decide what is the overall percentage of revenue did you spend on sales and marketing. And that's one number. The second number is then looking at the overall sales and marketing budget that you did spend, what percent was to brand and what percent was to the activation and performance piece. And I know that one might be a little bit harder to calculate, but do your best in what you can. But there are some recommendations. You should be spending at least 8 to 12% of revenue on sales and marketing. And in working with agencies, we find most are grossly underestimating or underinvesting in themselves. Yet what we see top performing firms do, they might actually be 16 up to maybe 20% of their revenue that they're spending on sales and marketing. So I think it'll be a good gut check for you to figure out where do you fall in the spectrum. And then also, again, look, as best as you can estimate the brand and activation, how much are you spending in each one of these different areas from what's left over? And again, this may open up some eyes in your firm and maybe give you some insight into how to better direct your budgets. The fourth secret now is think like a media company, not a vendor. How owning attention turns cold prospects into warm advocates. So here the old belief is really, hey, I'm going to post company updates and our wins, and that's what content marketing is all about, right? It's very self-promotional. It's sharing things like, hey, we just made this new hire. Here's our summer interns. Here's the award that we just won. Here's us at the soup kitchen donating our time. Listen, these are all important things, and you should be proud of those things. But to your prospects, they don't care about those things. Those are internal updates that are for more of an internal newsletter, if you will. This is not what you need to necessarily be sharing from a new business perspective. But we see time and time again in evaluating agencies, 95% or more of their content is all about them. It's not about any sort of thought leadership type content. So ultimately what ends up happening is your prospects don't engage, with it. Maybe, your clients do, but I would say most of the time the clients don't even care about these things. And it ultimately leads to missed opportunities to build a community. And that's what you're trying to do. Ultimately, your prospects should be thought of as a community you're trying to build, not even prospects. So some data points here about content. We talked about they don't want self-promotional content, but what they do want is thought leadership. 75% of decision makers said that thought leadership is more trustworthy for assessing capabilities and competencies than marketing materials. So that's what they're looking for. 54% said that an organization that can consistently produce high quality thought leadership has prompted them to research the company's offers or capabilities. So what I love about this stat is that, putting their thought leadership out there actually attracts them to you where they're going to ask you for their capabilities versus you trying to push your capabilities to them. 90% of decision makers said that they are moderately or very likely to be more receptive to sales or marketing outreach from a company that consistently produces high quality thought leadership. So this again goes to where like our focus model was. You're creating the thought leadership, you're putting in front of them through demand gen. And then when you do reach out to them in a more one-to-one fashion, they are more likely to respond. And this data point proves it, 90%. And then another one, 86% of decision makers said that they are moderately or very likely to invite them to participate in an RFP process. So again, putting out the thought leadership, they read it, they like it, you're on their radar screen, they now invite you to be a part of it versus you just pushing yourself onto them. So this is, again, I think a good frame that we've been using is thinking about your marketing from how does a media company approach this? And how does a typical agency or consulting firm approach their marketing? So from a media company perspective, their audience is their primary asset. Right? They want a loyal, engaged, and well-defined audience, and that's how they're going to monetize themselves. The audience is everything. Versus a typical agency, it's all about the work they produce, the case studies, the portfolio, the awards. The audience is really more of an afterthought. In a media company, content really is the engine, right? You're using content to build, attract, engage, and retain subscribers. Versus in a typical agency, content is really just a support tool. It's just there, hey, we just need our content to drive us leads and put prospects into a funnel. So two fundamentally different ideas on what the value and idea of what content's about. In a media company, they have to build a market before they sell to it. They have to use content, events, community, et cetera, to create familiarity and trust. If they don't have that audience, then there's nothing to sell to advertisers. Versus, again, in an agency setting, they're focused just on finding buyers right now. They give me meetings, and I need not only meetings, but people that have current needs and current budgets. I get it. I love that too, but you have to develop those markets. A media company, you're going to own the distribution. You have your own email list, your own community, podcast subscribers, events. You're owning the distribution. Versus an agency, oftentimes it's more about renting attention. You're doing paid ads, you're doing cold outreach, you're sponsoring other people's events. So these are repeated costs that come up to re-engage prospects, again, versus owning that audience. And the last piece is, in a media company, you're more focused on audience growth, engagement, and conversion opportunities. Versus in a typical agency, it's more about, again, just the meetings, the proposals, and the deals closed. So I like this frame because I think we can learn a lot about the media company and how they approach their building an audience, and what the role content plays into engaging that audience. And I think we can learn a lot from those principles that they use in there. So hopefully this provides some insights. So what I would take away from this is to treat your audience like an asset that is to be grown and nurtured. These are not just names in a CRM to help you get to your quarterly sales goal. Create content worth following, even if they're not ready to buy. Think long-term with the content. Measure your success by engagement depth, opens, comments, repeats, repeat visits, not just pipeline. Have a consistent publishing cadence that builds habits. Don't just post your newsletter whenever you get around to it, or maybe once a quarter. No media company would ever be able to survive if that was the case. You have to be consistent and build a habit of them consuming your content. You need multiple distribution plays, owned, social, partner channels. And then think of your marketing also as shows or series or franchises instead of just one-off campaigns. As an example, we have our Next Big Win newsletter. We've created an own franchise, if you will, around that. And we use that and take that media company type of approach with that. So how can you also think about your marketing in the same type of way that these media companies do with their shows and series, et cetera? So as an action step, what I would encourage you to do is a little bit of a thought experiment here, but if you were not allowed to sell anything for the next 12 months, the reason why is irrelevant. Just you couldn't sell anything for 12 months, how would you keep your ideal prospects coming back to you every week? What would your marketing include? What channels would you be? What would you say? Could you even do it? And I think the answer is yes, you can do it. You may not be doing it now, but think about that. What would that maybe look like? And how does that maybe inspire what your own sales and marketing could look like if given these constraints? And then that leads to the fifth and final secret here, which is content-based networking beats traditional cold outreach, turning podcasts, newsletters, and events into relationship engines. So the old belief is really that content's goal is views, clicks, downloads, right? That's how these are measured. But these ultimately are vanity metrics. In most agencies that we work with, they are not trying to get hundreds or thousands of clients in a year. A few usually is good enough. So to compare yourself, like your marketing is not supposed to reach everybody out there. It's supposed to reach a narrow amount of people. You're not trying to, if you have a podcast, you're not trying to be the next Joe Rogan podcast. It's completely different. So what ends up happening is you're creating this great content, but then you end up still having to chase these cold leads. So the idea here is like, how do you better leverage your content in a different way and a different mindset of what the purpose of this content happens to be? And I'll come back to that in a second. I want to share a stat, and this I'm also going to come back to, but 43% of adults said that they would like to be at least slightly famous. And you'll see why this is important here in a second. But before I get into that, so when I said the word content-based networking, what we mean by that, it's a business development approach that uses the creation of content as a vehicle to build relationships with high-value prospects, partners, or influencers, rather than just focusing solely on the audience consuming the content. It's not about the reach per se, it's about the relationships that you're building through the actual development of the content. So how does that actually come to life? What are some examples of that? So again, you have a podcast. The idea here is that the guests of your podcast are decision makers at your dream clients. You're not just interviewing your friend or a client or some academic. You're reaching out to actual prospects and asking them to be a part of your podcast for an interview. Imagine that you do a weekly podcast and you get to meet 52 of decision makers, so one per week. Imagine how that can compound over time. And again, you may now be asking, well, why would they join my podcast in the first place? Well, that goes back to that stat that I said about people wanting to be famous. We see it time and time again that people have maybe imposter syndrome that nobody's going to join my podcast, right? And what we see is a lot of these executives, they're trying to advance their careers. They want exposure. They might want it even for their company. So even though you're not the Joe Rogan podcast that might be out there, we're still seeing a very high acceptance rate from executives to be on podcasts and participate in these various types of content. So get over the imposter syndrome thing here, and we see it time and time again work. We did last year, we started a CMO series where we reached out to CMOs that were new in the role and invited them to be a part of a podcast that we were doing that was starting from scratch. And I had no idea if anybody would join. And we actually had an overwhelming response where we had more CMOs that were wanting to be on our podcast than we could even keep up with. So, it can happen, and we see it time and time again. Some other ideas from content, it's not just about podcasts, but it's running a virtual roundtable with a curated group of CMOs in your target industry. Same thing. Why would they want to join your roundtable? Well, you're facilitating this group of their peers that they can now learn from and meet. So again, it's using the content, the roundtable, as a way to network with new people. If you have an email newsletter, you can invite industry leaders to be interviewed and do like a short Q&A with them. You could do joint white papers or blogs with these and form strategic partners. So it's reframing how you think about creating content, not just for the sake of creating content and hoping someone reads it. It's about creating content with somebody that you ultimately want to know and build a relationship with them for. So how this actually comes to life from a process standpoint is, first and foremost, thinking from a strategic planning level. What is the vehicle that we're going to do this on? What is the topic that is going to be relevant to this audience we're trying to reach? It's then building an ideal prospect list. And prospect, I don't know if it's the best term, because these are more like guests or contributors that you're going to be working with, but ultimately they are your prospects. It's then reaching out, doing the recruitment, doing the follow-up. Depending on the format, you might want a co-moderator. Another thing we've seen success with is if you have like a virtual roundtables, bringing maybe one of your clients or an industry influencer or a media personality to co-moderate it with you, and it adds more credibility. It's then facilitating, and then yes, it's the creating the content piece. That may not be the primary reason why you're doing this is the content, but by all means, you should create it, get it out there. And then ideally, they're also, these guests are putting it on their social channels or whatnot. And, maybe you're going to get some exposure to their audience as well. So the primary is the relationship. The secondary would be the content. So it's a little bit of a mindset shift. So as far as an action step and a takeaway here, what we'd like you to do is run through this readiness report here where, for example, the platform inventory. Do you have any existing channels that could be used for collaboration? Do you have a podcast? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have something? One would be yes, kind of might be 0.5, and a no would be 0. And then going through all of these various questions, and again, evaluating then, okay, where are we strong? Where might we have some gaps? But ideally, if you can have ones in all of these, you're really well poised to take advantage of content-based networking. So that kind of concludes the 5 steps. So again, 5 secrets. Secret 1 is refers. Referrals are not a growth strategy. Relationship making is. Secret 2 is you don't need a rainmaker. You need a repeatable system. Secret 3 would be in B2B, brand is just as important as performance. Secret 4, think like a media company, not a vendor. And secret 5, content-based networking beats traditional cold outreach. So after, hearing this, you might be feeling or thinking to yourself that, yes, I think maybe we are a little over reliant on word of mouth referrals. Maybe we're lacking that, go to market system. Maybe we have been too focused on leads, or maybe we're struggling to produce content that actually opens up doors, or maybe we just haven't been able to get in the room with the right audiences. And it's likely because, you're playing by too many of the old rules. And we saw in the poll, 72% are probably doing a little bit too much in the old rules. And that old playbook, as we've talked about, is just not working as well anymore. The game has changed. Buyers don't want these transactional sales and marketing initiatives. They want to work with firms that they know, like, and trust. And that is really built through a process similar to relationship making. So with that said, we've actually developed a program called the Relationship Making Blueprint that will, it's our system basically put to help you land consistently 6 and 7 figure opportunities in just 90 days without a big team and budget. And it's a 10-week, this is something brand new that we're doing, 10-week live cohort where we'll provide step-by-step system tools and coaching. And it's really, again, built for agency and consulting growth leaders. As I mentioned, we've been doing this for about 5 years now. This is the same system that we do one-to-one with clients, but we know that sometimes from a budget standpoint and resources, it's tough to work with us maybe on a one-to-one basis, but it doesn't mean you can't get value from it. So we've repackaged that into this system, into this program, which we're really excited to be launching here. And that'll be launching here in September. But at the end of this, you're going to get a customized focus framework that we've just talked about for you. You'll have a clear ICP and buyer persona templates, thought leadership point of view. You'll have a signal-based outreach strategy. We're going to walk through launching your own virtual roundtable campaign. We're going to be diving deep into LinkedIn and coming up with your LinkedIn plan, as well as a 30-day execution plan to launch fast, because we understand that the whole system to take place is going to take months, in order to really be up and running. But we know that there are still short-term pressures. So we are building that in here to not just look at the long-term, but also some way to get some short-term wins as well. So it's really designed if you're, a founder, head of growth, BD or marketing lead in an agency, could be creative agencies, digital agencies, media buying, consultancies, any of those types of firms. This is really designed for, as long as you're, trying to reach brand side decision makers and you're tired of chasing these short-term tactics, this is really built for you. And this is proven. We've, big name clients, we've been able to work with clients to land. Example here, Superheroes, one of our longtime clients, they came to us when they're in Amsterdam and they were trying to penetrate the US market. We sat down, we worked with them to identify, some of the different service offerings that they have. We landed at something that they call Jimmy, which is a digital street art collective. And we were able to then build a name target account list of different companies that were focused on targeting Gen Z brands, targeting Gen Z consumers, I should say. And then we built sales and marketing initiatives with them to target those companies. And it led to multiple project wins, including one of those companies there that you see on the left. So again, the way we're going to set this up, it's going to be 10 weeks, and we're going to do the first session of the week is going to be more content driven, somewhat similar to like a webinar format. There's going to be homework, and then the latter half of the week, we're going to do office hours where you can work with our team, Janet and myself, and get answers to your questions. I think also of great value, you can hear what others that are in the program are challenged with or experiencing. So I think there's some peer learning and networking that'll happen. Again, you're going to get templates, frameworks, checklists. You're going to have access. We're going to record everything. So even if you miss a session or someone else on your team needs to listen in, you can share the recording. We're also providing access with each registration for up to 3 team members. So maybe the founder, the marketing, the BD, a salesperson. So a couple different people can join, because this is not necessarily just for one person. A system like this needs to be implemented, by many people within the firm. So ultimately, here, what we'd like to do, maybe some of you have seen this program, us already advertise it. The price is $19.95. We were running a early bird special for $14.95. We sold out of those completely. So what we'd like to do, though, anybody that's on this webinar today, we're offering a $300 coupon. You could use the code webinar300. And you'll save $300. We are going to limit it just to the first 5 companies that register by next Wednesday, August 20th. So you could go to christianbanach.com/blueprint, click to register. put in that webinar 300 code. You can also just go to christianbanach.com. You'll see in the navigation where to go for the blueprint. And then, yeah, we just again asked by the 20th because we are limiting the number of agencies that we're going to include into this program here. So that's the presentation here today. We've got about 8 minutes or so for Q&A. Q&A could include anything about the old ways, new ways, the secrets, or if you have questions about the blueprint, happy to answer anything that comes my way.
Good. Well, I do have a couple of questions waiting, so take a sip of water because I know you're right now really dry. Okay. I'll even say Dan mentioned, we have a lot of strong content. We have an agency newsletter with lots of consistent readers, and they're engaged every week, but we struggle with converting them to anything more tangible. Any suggestions on how to help with that conversion?
Yeah, well, I would ask probably a couple of follow-up questions. When you're saying, struggling to convert them, one thing is, are you looking at your stats and understanding who engaged, specifically and what content they engaged with? And then, rather than passively kind of waiting for them to hopefully reach out to you because they love your content, reaching out to them more directly one-to-one. And again, trying to build a relationship, with them. That could be adding them on LinkedIn, that could be sending them an email. But zeroing in on specific prospects that are, you could see in your analytics that are engaging. And beyond that, also, what are they engaging with? What specific piece of content are they engaging with? Because some parts of your newsletter maybe, doesn't show any level of intent. Other types of content might. And then how do you tailor your message and your follow-up based on the type of content that they're ultimately engaging with? So I would probably start there.
And Dan, feel free if you want to add on some more, or, you can put in your question. We can follow up with you individually if you need a little bit more detail. Another question we had is, can you give us a good example of a thought leadership material that would go into a B2B newsletter?
Yeah, great. So I think the frame that we always advise on with your newsletter is, how does this help our audience do their job better? Right? That's what we're ultimately trying to do. They should be reading your newsletter and be able to walk away with some sort of insight, whether that's more of a scoop or news that's happening in their industry, or something else that teaches them about, again, being able to do their job better. So I think that's part of it is the content really designed to deliver on that? Also, what we see sometimes is having too broad of a newsletter where you have all different industries, all different types of job titles, and then your content maybe isn't as focused as it should be. So do you maybe need different versions of the newsletter and segment it to different types of audiences? And then that might help being able to be more specific with the thought leadership content that you actually create. And then it'll add more value versus being, more generalized.
Great. Kind of in the same vein, and we're definitely seeing a theme here around leadership, thought leadership content. We've been trying to focus on building more engaging thought leadership content, but we struggle on how to position it so it doesn't seem corny or self-promotional. So how can we develop that consistent thought leadership content pipeline that isn't self-serving, but instead offers value? And I think this really plays on what you were just talking about as well, in that making sure that it's really about helping that prospects do their job better. How do you help them be smarter, be upskilled?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think one thing that I would add is a lot of the thought leadership content, doesn't necessarily even need a call to action, on it. I think that's where sometimes it can get corny or feel self-promotional, is when you're, asking them to buy now or download this or whatever. So I think, just changing that you're just trying to add value to them in the first place, and understanding that that is going to build a relationship. And people know, when they're ready to buy, and they've consistently seen you add value to them, they know that they could reach, out to you and get those, and you can help them with whatever problem they're having. So I don't think we need, you don't need a big buy now button on, all of your, blogs and thought leadership and, LinkedIn posts.
For sure, for sure. Something not about thought leadership content now.
Okay.
So something else that we do provide on a regular weekly basis is some RFP insights, and we do get a good response on that. So the question here is, I appreciate the share of the RFP opportunities via the newsletter. Do you have any tips or resources for identifying agency RFPs on a regular basis?
Yeah, there are a number of different tools that tools, maybe not the right word, platforms that you could subscribe to that are aggregators of various RFPs that are out there. They tend to be more general. They don't necessarily focus just on the agency space, but you can set up filters and zero in on maybe regions or various different things that you could do. And there are some that are fairly low cost. There's some that are much higher cost. So, I don't, off the top of my head, I can't come up with one, but I guarantee you could just Google RFP aggregators and go through and kind of do a little bit of your own research on them. But they're definitely out there, and they all kind of have some of their pros and cons.
Sure. I think this is a good question as well. And when it comes to target account list, so this person asked, we have a target account list that's huge. So how do you typically recommend paring that down to get to more personalized outreach?
Yeah. Well, I would also want to maybe talk about, and this is a separate conversation we'd have to talk further around is, should it be as huge as it is? I mean, that's number one. Like, is there a reason why it's so big? Again, I don't know your firm exactly, so maybe there is. Let's assume that there is. But I think, again, there's what we always ascribe to as tiering, right? There are kind of your tier one, tier two, and tier three prospects. And it could be around fit. Maybe again, if it's huge, maybe some of the smaller companies are more tier three. And you're not going to spend as much time with them on more one-to-one personalized outreach. So that could be one frame, is just like the size of the prize, the belief size of the prize. But also, if you think back to the focus framework that I shared, what in terms of the one-to-one outreach, you may have more one-to-many type campaigns going on to the broader audience, but you might want to just focus your one-to-one outreach onto those that are showing signals of some sort. And again, those that have engaged with you on social or on your website using visitor ID tracking, or there's been some event trigger that happened. So you may have a large pool of thousands of companies, but then when you look at those that have reached certain thresholds of signals, that number becomes much less. And then those are the ones that we would advise you then to spend the additional time to do the research and to do the more personalized outreach to those that are demonstrating those signals.
Hey, well, I know we are like 1 minute too, so unless anybody else has another question, we think we are starting to slow down. Um, oh, wait. So anybody else, if you want to run something by us? Yes, and just to reiterate, we will be sending you a recording of the entire webinar as well. So anything you missed, you can get again.
Great. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the questions and everybody attending, and good luck.
Yep. Thanks you all.